As I prepared this week, I thought about a couple of different ways of creating something. You know, sometimes creation is done without any real purpose or plan to it. I'm sure some of you have done creating like that in the past. I know that I have. There have been times when I've sat down as a creative outlet to just sit and write. No thought process, just whatever comes to my head, I get it down on paper. Really, it's usually typing for me because I can't read my chicken scratch handwriting, so I have to type it so that I can understand it. But I'll just sit and type as a creative outlet for me to get the thoughts that I have in my head out. That's one way of creating, right? With no plan, no purpose, no intention behind it, other than to spill out whatever is in my brain. And there's nothing wrong with that type of creation. It's good. Some artists do that kind of creating in painting and in sculpting and things like that. And that's where you get sort of oddly shaped things sometimes in paintings that seem, oh, look, life. Behold, the computer lives. Thank you, Dan. Not well, for now. For now. Our creation may be short-lived as compared to God's creation. So that sort of creating is a way to get something out, right? But far more often than creating without a purpose is creation with a purpose. That you sit down and you know what you want to write, or you know the art project that you're working on, and so you begin to envision it in your head, right? What is that going to look like? What is that going to sound like? How am I going to take what I have in my head and put it down, and you think it out, right? You create an outline if you're writing a paper, or if you're going to be painting, you might pencil in what it looks like and then go back over and paint over it or something like that. At least that's my understanding of creating art. I don't actually do that, so I'm guessing here, right? Whatever it is we create, most likely we do so with intention and purpose. Most often, that's how we do it. And of course, that's precisely the way that God did. God chose to create with intention and purpose when He created on those 6 days. I don't presume, I don't believe that I know all of that purpose. I don't for a moment think that I completely and perfectly understand the why behind God doing what He did. And I think if anybody's being honest, they would admit the same thing. That none of us know the mind of God. But it seems fairly clear to me, just looking at creation, looking at us, that creation with a purpose is what God did when He created. And as we read from Genesis 1 here in just a moment, I want you to listen for that purpose. Hear what the author says about God's creating. Listen to how God creates. Not the why behind it, but the how behind it. Listen to what He declares about creation. So let's read together, and then we'll talk about it. And this morning I'm going to deviate. I brought up several translations this week, and I chose one that I wanted to read. I'm going to read from the Message this morning, which I think is just a beautiful, beautiful rendition of the poetry of Genesis chapter 1. So let's read from the word of the Lord in Genesis this morning. First this, God created the heavens and earth. All you see, all you don't see. Earth was a soup of nothingness, a bottomless emptiness, an inky blackness. And God's Spirit brooded like a bird above the watery abyss. God spoke, light, and light appeared. God saw the light was good and separated light from dark. God named the light day, He named the dark night. It was evening, it was morning, day 1. God spoke, sky, in the middle of the waters. Separate water from water. God made sky. He separated the water under the sky from the water above sky. And there it was. He named the sky heavens. It was evening, it was morning, day 2. God spoke, separate water beneath heaven gathered into one place. Land appeared. And there it was. God named the land earth. He named the pool water ocean. God saw that it was good. God spoke, earth, green up, grow all varieties of seed-bearing plants, every sort of fruit-bearing tree. And there it was. Earth produced green seed-bearing plants, all varieties, and fruit-bearing trees of all sorts. God saw that it was good. It was evening, it was morning, day 3. God spoke. Lights come out, shine in heaven's sky, separate day from night, mark seasons from days and years, lights in heaven's sky to give light to earth. And there it was. God made 2 big lights, the larger to take charge of day, the smaller to be in charge of night. And he made the stars. God placed them in the heavenly sky to light up earth and oversee day and night, to separate light and dark. God saw that it was good. It was evening, it was morning. Day 4. God spoke. Swarm, ocean with fish and all sea life. Birds fly through the sky over earth. God created the huge whales, all the swarm of life in the waters, and every kind of species of flying birds. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them, prosper, reproduce, fill ocean. Birds reproduce on earth. It was evening, it was morning. Day 5. God spoke. Earth, generate life, every sort and kind, cattle and reptiles and wild animals, all kinds. And there it was, wild animals of every kind, cattle of all kinds, every sort of reptile and bug. God saw that it was good. God spoke. Let us make human beings in our image. Make them reflecting our nature so they can be responsible for the fish in the sea, the birds in the air, the cattle, and yes, earth itself, and every animal that moves on the face of the earth. God created human beings. He created them godlike, reflecting God's nature. He created them male and female. God blessed them. Prosper, reproduce, fill earth, take charge. Be responsible for fish in the sea and birds in the air, for every living thing that moves on the face of the earth. Then God said, I've given you every sort of seed-bearing plant on earth, and every kind of fruit-bearing tree, given them to you for food, to all animals and all birds, everything that moves and breathes. I give whatever grows out of the ground for food. And there it was. God looked over everything he had made. It was so good. So very good. It was evening, it was morning. Day 6. I really love the way that the message, renders that poetry. It's so beautiful. The refrain of God spoke. It really spoke to me this week as I read it again and again. I want to talk today about God, the Creator. We're going to talk first about in the beginning. I want to begin, though, by sharing what some of you emailed me this week. Now, I didn't get a flood of emails like I was hoping. I was hoping to hear from many more of you, but that's okay. The people I did hear from, I really appreciate. And I want to read those to you right now, those things that I received. When I asked you the question, what do you love most? What brings you joy from creation? I got to hear from some of you. And this is what you shared with me. I'm going to read them in order of my receiving them, okay? If one tries to learn about the origin of the universe via the science of cosmology, then I believe it is easy to believe and see God as the Creator. For of all we know now about the universe, there appears to be only one place that is perfectly suited to host human life, and that is planet Earth, with abundant water and oxygen and nourishments for man to live and survive. God surely created that for us here, giving us a comfortable place to live, and at the same time, a way to be with him in eternity via the sacrifice of his Son for our sake. I think that's beautifully said. That was given to me by Lacey. Now given to us by Lacey. Thank you, Lacey. Maybe because you started with Genesis, one of my favorite books, your question on our favorite creation immediately took me back to my first treasure, and it made me smile. You couldn't see behind the mask, this person says. I was 5 years old, living in the country. I loved to get up before everyone else and go outside. It must have been fall, and there was dew all over the grass on the hill in the backyard. I thought it was the greatest thing. I would look at it. The little blades of grass stood up. I loved that the earth was fresh and clean. There were no footprints. No one had messed it up, so to speak. But I knew that would happen. I guess I would have meditated on it for a while before I knew what meditation was. I'm not sure how often I did that. We only lived there a year, but I'll never forget it. To me, it was special. Only God and I were up, and He had put the dew on the grass just for me. Today, I'm still the first one up at sunrises. That was given to us by Doris. I love it. Made me think of Gideon asking for the dew only to be on the fleece, and asking them for the dew only to be on the ground instead of the fleece. Not that Doris was testing God here. Doris was in communication with God. That's what I mean to say. I love to see and hear rough, rolling waves. I love the simplicity of that response from Ellen Warren. The rough, rolling waves. If you've ever sat on the beach and just close your eyes and listen to them over, the rhythmic noise that gives. It's why so many people fall asleep to noise machines that play that sound over and over again. It's soothing. The butterfly has intrigued me since the day monarch butterflies arrived in, and I'm going to leave out. I'm going to omit the location here for a moment because this will give the person away. I don't want to do that. The day that they arrived in blank, one fall night. The next morning, the whole side of my house was fluttering with butterfly wings. Although, if you know this person, you probably already guessed who this is. As I thought about it, the idea of butterflies is probably given away. As I approached junior high, the whole side of the gym, roof to ground, was a fluttering wall of butterflies. No one wanted to go to class. Well, I mean, come on, truthfully, it's junior high. Nobody wanted to go to class anyway. But I can see why. No one wanted to go to class and miss the show. But the butterflies left en masse to resume their trip. How did they know what to do and where to go? God. That's submitted by Marty, as most of you probably guessed, by the butterflies. I love that. If you've ever seen that, butterflies on the side of a building all flapping their wings at the same time, it's mesmerizing, and you can't take your eyes away. And then finally, there seemed to be perfect peace on the sixth day. I love that this person took it as creation as we read it in Genesis 1. Perfect peace on the sixth day. Oh, what would we give for that, right? Animals were eating green plants, not each other. People were eating from seed-bearing plants and fruit trees. I love that idea of peace that Michael gives us from Genesis 1. That there is peace and harmony in creation when God made it. I wanted to share those because you guys hear from me all the time. One, I wanted to hear from you, and I wanted you to hear from each other. There's something refreshing about that, I think. I appreciate those responses for a lot of reasons, but mostly because for each of us, we hear and see different things when we read and when we think about creation. And each of those things gives us a sort of a jolted energy, right? I have no doubt as Marty and Doris were recounting those childhood stories that, like Doris said in her email to me, I couldn't see it, but she had a smile on her face thinking about it. There's something about that it infuses us with energy and it refreshes us. It makes us feel good. It gives us joy and appreciation. And my hope beyond anything else this morning as we're thinking about creation is that you leave with joy and appreciation today. Not some new idea that I have about creation, because I don't have any new ideas about creation. I want you to leave with joy and appreciation today. And essentially what I want you to leave with is worship on your heart. That's what worship is. Worship is our joy and appreciation and admiration of God. That's what I want you to leave with today. Now, with regard to Genesis 1 in particular, there are a few things from the text itself I'd like to look at and point out. First is that many modern readers want to know what was before the beginning. So I know in the Message, when I read it, it said, first this, but that's a shorthand way of rendering the Hebrew there, in the beginning. Or when God began creating, is the ancient Jewish way of translating this text. In the beginning. But what was before the beginning? Well, God, of course. But what's sort of amazing and frustrating all at the same time for us as modern readers is the Jews never tried to answer that question, at least not in Genesis. There's no point at which they are concerned with the writer here, with potentially Moses, is concerned with what happened before. Creation itself is the act of, well, it's the thing that is being trying to get across here, right? I don't know. There's something about it that's so, it grounds me, and it's so powerful. All of the answers that we want to know are unknown, at least for the time being. Moses, again, or whoever wrote this part of the story, either didn't know the answers either, or was content to leave them unanswered. But the overarching question all through Genesis 1 isn't what was before creation, but who is powerful enough to create. And overwhelmingly, over and over and over again, we get that answer. Yahweh. Elohim. God. Only one God is powerful enough to create in this way. And the writer doesn't just tell us in verse 1 either, although they certainly do. That would have been sufficient for the story to begin with, hey, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then to leave God to the side and just talk about creation. That would be one way of doing it. But what's the refrain all throughout Genesis 1? In the Message, it was, God spoke. God spoke. God spoke. In your translation, it might say, and God said, or then God said, over and over and over again. The writer doesn't want us to lose sight of who's really doing all of this. God, the Creator, is doing this. But then we get to verse 26. And what do we see in verse 26? Jump down there with me if you have your Bible open. What do we see in verse 26? Then God said what? Let us make human beings in our image. Who are the us? So I want to talk about the word with God now. And this is where the reading of John 1 would come in handy if you happen to do that for today. That question of who are us leads us to talking about the Word of God. I wrote about this in my bulletin article, but I also want to emphasize it right now as well. Some have argued that the us, the we in Genesis chapter 1, when God speaks, is simply God using a royal we language. That's what kings do. Kings, they represent the whole kingdom. And so they talk about themselves as the kingdom. We are the kingdom. That's what kings do. I'm watching this new sci-fi TV show called The Foundation. It's based on the Isaac Asimov books, and the emperor in that show is called Empire. In other words, he is the embodiment of the empire. That's how kings thought about themselves. So maybe God is so narcissistic that that's how God thinks about himself, right? No, certainly not. I think we would all reject that understanding, as would I. I absolutely reject that understanding. That doesn't make much sense to me at all. Especially when you go and you read John chapter 1. John's gospel helps us understand and interpret Genesis chapter 1. John's gospel doesn't change Genesis 1. It doesn't change who does the creating, but it does change our understanding of who was there, of who the we are in verse 26. So let's read from John chapter 1 here. This again is from the Message, verses 1 through 5. The Word was first. The Word present to God. God present to the Word. The Word was God, in readiness for God from day one. Everything was created through him. Nothing, not one thing, came into being without him. What came into existence was life, and the life was light to live by. The lifeline blazed out of the darkness. The darkness couldn't put it out. John's gospel leaves us with no doubt, absolutely no doubt, who was there with God in the act of creation. But not only who was with God, but so integrally involved in the act of creation itself that the Word was present, the Word was active, the Word is Jesus. And that all creation is actually done through him. Not a single thing was created in those 6 days that didn't go through Jesus. God speaks by his word, creation. Capital W, word. Over and over again in Genesis 1, we hear that God speaks. Then God said, then God said. Well, what gets spoken? Words. And creation happens. The Word of God. It's through the Word of God that creation happened. John says that not one thing came to be without the Word. Everything owes its existence to Jesus. We owe our existence to Jesus. But of course, we owe so much more to him as well. We owe our righteousness to him. We owe our salvation to him. We owe our freedom, our joy to him. Again, I told you the one thing I want you to take away from today is joy and appreciation. If reading this today doesn't bring you joy, doesn't bring you to appreciation, in other words, as I said before, it doesn't bring you to worship God, then you need to reevaluate your life. Because that's all this should do. Genesis 1 and John 1 should bring you to worship God. And the Word who was with him, and through whom all things were created. We should be thankful that God chose to create us. That he had intention in creating us, purpose in creating us. Thankful that we are part of that. And thankful that we get to know and now be in relationship with the God of creation. That's what I wanted to talk about from Genesis 1. I thank you again for those of you that emailed me and shared with me, and by extension shared with all of us. I love each and every one of those responses, and thank you for sharing those things with us. To close out for today, a couple of things that I want you to think about. You know, none of us, again, fully understand everything that's going on in Genesis 1. None of us fully understand what it means to be made in God's image, to, as the message says, to be made God-like. I love that idea that we are God-like, and yet we are so broken at the same time. What does it mean to be made in God's image is a question that we come away with. But really, the question that I want you to know is, does being made in God's image make a difference in your life? Whether you fully understand what it is or not, and I'm going to guess that you don't, I know I don't, does it make a difference in your life that you are made in God's image? Does it change who you are? Does it change how you interact with other people? How you represent God to the world? Does being made in God's image make a difference for us? It ought to. And then the second thing, just for some fun to think about, if you could ask God to uncreate something, what would it be? I mean, some of you already have your answers. I already know that. Just, if it's butterflies, don't tell Marty, okay? We know how she feels about those. For me, I'll tell you mine, it's spiders. I don't want spiders. I know they do lots of good. I want all you people that answer that to go away. Just don't talk to me anymore. No spiders. I want spiders gone. God, uncreate spiders. However you got to do that, do it. What is that for you? Just a fun little thing, a fun little question. That's in my eyes. A fun little question to think about. If you could ask God to create something, what would it be? Again, I hope this morning that you leave today with a greater joy and appreciation for creation. And for the God who created, who chose to make you, who chose to make us in His image, like Him. Does that change us? We come to our family time now, a time to share, to, again, if you are joyful this morning, if you've got something, some good news that you want to share with us, that's what we're here for. We want to celebrate with you because as a family, we do that together. If you have a need of any kind, a concern, prayer request, we want to hear that as well so that we can be in prayer for you, for your family, for whatever the situation is. So please don't hesitate. We can't know about those things unless you tell us, unless you let us know. So give us the opportunity to share with you and to pray for you. Come forward as we stand and sing.